Hello and welcome to the Slate Political Gabfest. August 21st, 2025, the Is This Martial Law edition. I'm David Plotz of CityCast in Washington, D.C., which has been a really interesting place to be.
Yeah, I want a first-person reportage.
You'll get to that. You'll get to that. Using reportage, the Frenchified Jean de Kerson, the co-anchor of CBS Evening Nouvelles and CBS Evening News Plus from New York City. Hello, John.
Hi. Remind me to talk about how Medvedev referred to the French President Macron, speaking of French, and just taunting the one world leader to another.
Oh, really?
Yes, it's incredibly juvenile and trollish, but
exciting.
Has a French cast to it. So
let's discuss. There's a strong historic relationship between Russia and France. Like there was French was spoken in Russia a lot. There was a very close relationship up through the Russian Revolution. The epicenter, however, was Emily Bazelon of the New York Times and Yale University Law School. Hello, Emily.
Hello. So glad you're back.
This week on the Gabfest, the federal military intrusion into D.C. deepens as National Guard troops pour into my hometown to stop a crime wave that doesn't exist. Then, is the war in Ukraine any closer to ending after a week of wild travel and gyrations? The Alaska summit with Putin, the White House summit with Zelensky and most of Europe. Then we'll talk to Jerusalem Demsis, the founder of a new, enthusiastically liberal media venture, The Argument, about how liberals can reverse the rising tide of illiberalism. Plus, we'll have cocktail chatter.
Juguemos a Adivina el Precio de Burlington. El regreso escolar significa volver a ahorrar. Traemos jeans para tus niños desde, un momento, solo $11.99. Burlington pasa el examen. ¿Y qué tal las mochilas con personajes? Las tenemos desde $12.99. Burlington lo ha vuelto a hacer. ¿Y los tenis para niños? Marcas de primera y a la última moda desde $11.99. ¡Ya puedes ahorrar! Burlington, marcas rebajas, wow. Los estilos y selección varían por tienda.
Choosing a bottled Starbucks Frappuccino drink that's all flavor and just 100 calories? Easy. Choosing between creamy vanilla, double chocolate, and sea salt caramel flavors? A little harder. Try the delicious new Starbucks Frappuccino light drinks. Look for them wherever you buy groceries. Start with Starbucks coffee.
So I'm taping from my home, which is in a leafy neighborhood near the cathedral here in Washington, D.C. There's truly, like, John, you asked for a kind of first person. There's a very, like, I have to say, I've spent much of the last couple of days since I've been back from vacation sort of bouncing around the city, and I biked downtown. I biked Dupont Circle. I was down on the mall. And in my experience, I saw not very much of this federal presence. I did not go to Union Station. I didn't go to some of the places that have been identified as where the strongest federal presence has been. But there's an extraordinary federal presence in D.C., whether or not I'm seeing it. There is D.C. National Guard, huge numbers of ICE agents around. National Guard troops from 6 states are now coming to the city, and all on this Trumpian pretext that the city is overrun with crime and needs to endure some form of what I don't even know what to call it other than martial law. Like it's a form of martial law when you have soldiers occupying a city and engaging in control over the population. That seems to me to be a definition of martial law. It feels really dark in the kind of obvious rich person metrics. Oh, restaurant reservations are down. That's whatever. People are a little bit afraid to go out. Gay bars, there's been extraordinary drop off of people visiting gay bars. But it's where you really feel it is just these, I have friends who are they're warning employees, warning people who clean their houses not to come to work. There are attempts when there are signs that ICE is acting in a particular neighborhood, there are attempts to warn people to stay away from it. And it just feels terrible. Yesterday, there was this grotesque sort of press conference spectacle at Union Station where Stephen Miller and J.D. Vance just absolutely sort of railed against people protesting what the administration was doing. It feels sick.
We are not going to let the communists destroy a great American city, let alone the nation's capital. And let's just also address one other thing. All these demonstrators that you've seen out here in recent days, all of these elderly white hippies, they're not part of the city and never have been.
That's the beginning of that's just my visceral reaction. Let's actually get to talking about this. So, Emily, is this martial law, number one?
It's definitely federal troops in the city ordered there by the president in a, self-aggrandizing way. Because DC has this unique history of presidential and congressional control until 1973, and then limited self-rule, but always with the federal government kind of like hanging over it.
Can I actually just stop you for 1 second there? One thing I want to emphasize, DC has a history of congressional control. It does not have a history of presidential control. The control of DC up until 1974 was very much congressional control, not presidents acting in the city, Congress acting in the city. It's a federal enclave that Congress controlled. So the idea that this is historically congruent with what presidents used to do is false. It's congruent with what Congress used to do. So that's I want to make that point, just to emphasize that.
The reason I said it that way is that before the Home Rule Act, it was Congress and then commissioners appointed by the president who were governing the city. So it wasn't like the president had no role. But I take your point. And obviously, this is an extraordinary step that Trump has taken, and I don't mean to minimize that. I think that one thing I wrestle with is things that are bad, but probably legal versus things that are bad and illegal. And what tipped over, in my view, into illegal was toward the end of last week when the Trump administration removed the DC police chief and said that they were taking over the department. And then DC properly rushed to court and said, wait. In addition to the fact that this is not allowed by home rule, it's totally disruptive to the city's operations. And, the police chief said, this is, in all my experience in law enforcement, one of the most dangerous and destructive things I've ever seen. And then the administration had to, I think, embarrassingly dial that back and rush to rewrite that part of the order and make it clear that actually that was not what was going to happen. And I think that's just proof of how heedless and kind of careless the administration has been about this. But, I think to your larger point, David, setting aside the legality of this, the idea that this is all about fighting crime seems obviously like a pretext. There does seem to be a lot of immigration enforcement happening. And this idea of changing the rules in DC so that the police are cooperating with immigration enforcement and Trump can make them do that, that is a significant move. And then the idea also that states are sending National Guard troops into DC, Republican-led states, as a way of, quote, supporting Trump, but really just like making a big show because goodness knows there are things those National Guard troops could be doing in their states, or just like this isn't their job. That seems alarming too. And all of this, always with Trump, it's like when he makes these moves that seem to threaten the basic tenets of democracy, is it for show? Is it all going somewhere? Or does it have something deadly serious underneath it? You can never really tell in the moment because the worst thing hasn't yet happened. But certainly it's not good to have this precedent out there.
John, I hate to make it about politics, but what is the political spectacle here? What is the purpose? Who's the audience? Why is it being done?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, I think on the martial law front, I think it's more this might be the first step towards rather than is one. I mean, I think you need to have things like military tribunals replacing the law and curfews and suspension of civil rights. Clearly for the undocumented migrants, the protections afforded by the Constitution have been suspended. So there's some of that. But I think the fact that the police chief, that the administration did withdraw and that the courts did have played a role is probably what breaks this from the traditional definition of martial law. However, to your political question, David, this clearly is a pretextual or something launched on thin evidence in preparation for taking the show on the road. And by thin evidence, I mean I think there's been an interesting discussion, and I feel like Emily will know the details of this better, but about the crime statistics in Washington. Every time we talk about crime statistics, there's always some complexity about the way counting is done, local statistics versus FBI statistics, and so forth. But what I mean by the thin pretext is not that there isn't crime in Washington, or that, in fact, there is too many murders in Washington, even though the number's been going down. It's that, does it require this level of attention and this level of law enforcement? And secondly, is all of this muscle on the street going to actually do anything to help the underlying event? There is a way in which all of this, and this is still getting to this idea that it's a show for the rest of the country and a show for the president, there's a way that it sort of feels like if you have a flood in your basement, you send hundreds of troops in the basement, and, the water gets soaked up by their clothes. And so that does something to mitigate the flooding in the basement. But the flooding's coming from a hole in the roof. And so you've sent like the wrong force to do a half measure that doesn't get to the underlying problem. And so I feel like that's the kind of facts of the case. In terms of the politics, clearly it's the president is doing two things. One, he's showing that he's the center of all action related to American life. His supporters appreciate it. Republicans are favored on the crime issue sort of by natural instinct over time. And so it's an area where they are seen to be competent by voters. But I would hasten to add that overreach has been a major story of the second Trump term. And with respect to immigration, while people favor the idea of lowering undocumented immigrants from coming into the United States, the methods the president have used have actually driven his poll numbers down. And so in the end, while this might be something cheered by his base, the tactics might end up being unpopular for him and his party. It's certainly highly unpopular among Washington, D.C. residents, according to the Washington Post poll.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because D.C. definitely has a crime problem, like most big cities, like most of America. It has a crime problem. There's a lot of places in DC that don't feel safe to be in, don't feel safe after dark, where there isn't the level of kind of public order that you would want. DC is in no way exceptional in this way. And certainly the idea that DC uniquely among American cities requires federal troops to come from Tennessee and distant states in order to enforce a kind of public order is ludicrous. So that's part one. Part two is the actual actions that these troops are taking, and these are not taking place in the places that are most dangerous. I mean, you have lots of troops, lots of people around in heavily touristed areas, but those heavily touristed areas essentially have no crime anyway. So the only place I've seen people has been around the mall, and like around you could not get yourself mugged on the mall if you stayed up until 5 a.m. and wore a mug me shirt and held a crypto hard drive with $100 million worth of crypto on it. You still couldn't get yourself mugged on the mall.
I think that to me is what's important here. I think that because the debate over the statistics and whether crime is bad in DC takes place in one area, and I find it a really interesting debate. It's distinct from what's going on here because, as you point out, David, all the muscle is applied in areas where it's not needed. They had this photo opportunity at Union Station in which the vice president said, Union Station is a great symbol of what's possible when you actually have the willpower to bring law and order. Nobody's going to Union Station to do much of anything. Second of all, Union Station is not the locus of Washington, D.C. This image of Washington that has been created by the president as a lawless hellscape. Union Station is.
I will say this. The only time I've ever been a victim of a violent crime in D.C. was in Union Station.
At Union Station.
But it was in 1992, so I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, Union Station is no picnic. It's sort of the Penn Station of Washington. But anyway, it was just, I guess what's my point here is that the theater on Wednesday of the Secretary of Defense and the Vice President, Stephen Miller, going to Union Station seem to sort of give up the game here, which is that regardless of the actual underlying problem and whether these measures are appropriate, the riff about why this was needed, the exaggeration, and the total deception reminded me of what J.D. Vance said during the campaign about the lies he told about Haitians in Ohio, when he said, if you have to create stories so the American media actually pays attention to the suffering of American people, then that's what I'm going to do. This feels like another created story.
Yeah, and then the suffering of the American people, which is real in neighborhoods of concentrated poverty, where the crime rate is higher, just completely gets ignored, right? And instead we have these like racist and offensive social media posts from the federal government with just like mugshots of people of color in a row. It's just totally exploiting what is actually a real problem and causes real misery, crime, and turning it into this political card that you're waving around when what you're doing is like the opposite of actually solving the problem. And yeah, and then there's this question of what happens next. Like, do they pull out and slink away the way they did in Los Angeles? Or does Trump keep this going because he's enjoying having Washington, D.C. in his grip?
Well, I think there is this premise like, oh, he can only do this for 30 days and then Congress has to, he'll just declare another emergency, right?
Yeah, only parts of it have to end after 30 days.
Yeah, ICE,
right?
they can do whatever they want.
Exactly. He has the power to keep parts of it going. And yeah. And then, you know, I don't mean to sound, I brought this up a few weeks ago and then felt worried that I was seeming kind of crazed. But then you start wondering about like the elections and whether this is all about just like testing how Americans respond to having federal law enforcement and troops in the streets of American cities, which, happen to be Democratic strongholds and are going to continue to support Democrats in elections.
I mean, that gets to a question that I have, which is, what is the proper response to this? So interestingly, the elected officials in D.C. have been very muted, and that's a very deliberate strategy because unlike in other states where you have governors and governors exist in somewhat autonomously from the federal government, we do not have that here in D.C. The mayor of D.C. and all laws in D.C. are subjunctive to Congress, and the federal government has enormous power. And so I understand why the elected officials. It's been actually quite muted in public response to, and I think maybe it's a sort of unconscious sense that many people have that protest is what Trump is looking for. That protest and a kind of sense of public disorder brought on by protest is what Trump really wants. And so if you don't give him that, then you defang him, you defuse the situation a little bit. But I wonder, Emily, do you think if you're, someone who doesn't like what's going on here, that protest is a proper response, or should you just be like, no, we're just going to act as though nothing is going on and act peacefully in all situations, but never take to the streets in a kind of active way?
I don't think never, right? I mean, that's giving up such an important tool of refusing to submit and of resistance. And so I think people who organize and think about social movements, like, you never want to give up that tactic, and they shouldn't. I also think that being judicious and careful about it and not providing bait, which I totally agree with you, is one of the aims here, is really important. And so when there is going to be protest, I hope that it is very well thought through, that it is like clearly nonviolent, that it does not have like a bunch of Antifa people running around providing provocation and an excuse for, further kind of uglier crackdowns. I think that's always the challenge with these things, because protests are unruly and they can't be controlled by definition. Like, it's about a lot of people mobilizing. But to the extent that this can be a, disciplined set of responses, I think that's going to be important. And look, I mean, the slinking away of the federal troops in Los Angeles was kind of important, right? It turned into a nothing burger. And that was, in a sense, like, embarrassing for Trump that he'd made such a big deal of this and then it sort of fizzled. And some of the troops were saying this was just a fake mission.
I don't remember, John or Emily, in California, where the troops were federal troops, they were not California National Guard, because there's no way Gavin Newsom would have sent the California National Guard in, right?
No, he federalized them, right? Like he did take. It was the California National Guard. There was a fight over whether he'd properly notified Newsom,
and Newsom lost that fight.
Yeah.
So in theory, in any city that Trump wants to do this, he can federalize the National Guard if the governor isn't agreeable and send troops in.
But he has less control over the troops than he does in D.C., which is why in Los Angeles, although the lines got blurred, there was the idea that they were protecting federal buildings.
And he can't commandeer the police force in other cities.
They then ended up sort of protecting ICE agents in a way that bled over. I mean, I want to just jump in this point now that I'm thinking about it. The Wall Street Journal has a piece on Thursday basically saying that the proper way to think about the DC action is it's an immigration enforcement. I mean, that in other words, the hellscape crime that Trump has created in the caricature isn't what's being attended to by all the additional forces. The additional forces are basically there making immigration arrests. And as we know, there's one study out this week that shows an overwhelming majority of the migrants that have been detained are not criminal. And we don't know the sorting yet of the DC immigration arrests, but if they are immigration arrests and not, again, based on the caricature Trump has created, you would imagine bandoliered, swarms of bandoliered ruffians being hoarded, being rounded up, and they're not. So it looks like an immigration enforcement act.
John, this week there was this interesting report saying that the Democratic voter registration is in free fall, that they've lost the entire advantage they used to have in voter registration, that there's been a sort of 4.7 million voter swing, with Republicans gaining a huge number and Democrats losing a huge number in voter registration between 2020 and 2024. So maybe it's not a 2025 data, but it's certainly during the Biden years. Do you get a sense that Democrats have any sort of political strategy as a party to respond to this? This is going literally after their power centers. It is going after, it's daring Democratic voters to try to stop them.
Right. I mean, there's definitely a hope that somebody will take the bait, and that a moment will be created. And that's both a kind of play that Donald Trump has run and that we've seen in other instances, which is create chaos to preach order.
What a great phrase, the John Dickerson phrase there.
So I don't think it's mine. I think it's but I appreciate that. So chaos would be good. So to the extent, so what is the I don't know what the Democratic Party is losing voters. A lot of voters are becoming independents. The Democratic Party has a registration advantage in a lot of places, although that doesn't matter so much anymore. In other words, people are registered Democrat but might vote for the Republicans. They have their own problems, and there is no Democratic Party kind of voice or vision. I do wonder whether this creates the conditions for a Bill Clinton-like figure who sees the effort to bait the Democrats, also sees the way in which certain voters are worried about whether it's actually straight up crime or just the kind of chaos feeling in life. Again, some of which is created, or maybe a lot of which is created by the current administration, and is able to play to both of those audiences in an elegant way in today's media environment. That person doesn't seem to exist right now. Gavin Newsom is doing a series of things that are innovative, and perhaps they get there. I mean, there definitely isn't a unified reaction here, except it does feel like there is not energy in the streets in a way that probably is good. I think the fact that the LA troops disappeared, I'm not sure it's embarrassing for the president in a way that actually hurts him. I think for his purposes, he and Republicans get to say, it was lawless in LA and we sent the troops and then the crime went away. Right. I mean, that's, and you can say, well, no, because there was never any problem to begin with and you overreacted, but like you might win, you might win some applause in what Matt Iglesias calls the discourse cities, but I don't think as a national political matter that's going to win Democrats a lot of support. But I think taking the bait would be a problem for Democrats, given that they are in this disordered state.
Can we talk for another minute about Newsom? Because you're right. He's like very visible right now, right? First of all, he's mocking Trump on social media in a way that's quite Trumpian, right? He's like stealing the catchphrases, like, thank you for your attention. He has this plan to counter the Texas gerrymandering that he's going to try to push through. That's going to be a huge question, whether his counter proposal, right, he wants to try to create 5 more safe Democratic seats in California to balance out the 5 safe Republican seats that Republicans are on the cusp of providing in Texas. But Newsom's plan has to pass as a ballot initiative, and that's going to be a big lift, whether it passes or not. But he's like clearly putting himself out on the forefront of national politics by taking this on. And all of this seems like a precursor to running for president in 2028. He's not, I agree with you, John, the figure you just outlined, someone who can kind of come in and seem like the sort of calming, I don't know, like Eisenhower-like centrist figure that the country might want, or whoever the Democrats totally failed to supply in the early 1970s, right, after the upheaval of the late 60s. So he's not that figure, but right now he's kind of the most visible Democrat out there. And so is he kind of making lemonade from lemons, politically speaking, or is it going to turn out to be a problem for the Democrats that the person who's getting the most mileage out of this right now is the like very liberal governor of California?
Just one quick final note. The CityCast DC team is doing an amazing job covering the DC, what's going on in DC. Listen to the CityCast DC podcast if you want to know what's happening day after day here. This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Mint Mobile. You know what doesn't belong in your epic summer plans? Getting burned by your old wireless bill. That's why you should switch to Mint Mobile. Even Slate's president, Charlie Kammerer, is using Mint Mobile, and Charlie loves it. He says it was really easy to switch providers. The SIM card was shipped right to his home. They let him use his existing phone. He didn't have to change his phone number. And he's on the $15 a month deal and getting unlimited talk and text over their 5G network at literally a fraction of what he was paying with someone else. This year, skip breaking a sweat and breaking the bank. Get this new customer offer and your 3-month unlimited wireless plan for just $15 a month at mintmobile.com/Gabfest. That's mintmobile.com/Gabfest. Upfront payment of $45 required, equivalent to $15 per month. Limited time new customer offer for first 3 months only. Speeds may slow above 35 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details. This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Bombas. Summer's here and we're all chasing something. A break, a goal, a vibe. Do not let bad socks and blisters ruin it. I am a Bombas socks evangelist. I'm a Bombas socks enthusiast. Every day I'm in my Bombas socks now. They're so comfortable. They have this incredible quality of being both cool and breathable, but also holding tight, gripping in all the right ways. And it makes all the kind of exercise I do in Bombas a pure joy. And Bombas doesn't stop at socks. Check out the fresh white tees, waterproof slides for the beach, and buttery soft sweat-wicking underwear for head to toe comfort. Best of all, Bombas items don't just feel good, they do good, because one purchased equals one donated to someone who needs it. Head over to bombas.com/political and use code political for 20% off your first purchase. That's bombas.com/political, code political at checkout. bombas.com/political and use code political. This episode is brought to you by Jerry. Would you rather perform interpretive dance at your next board meeting or shop for car insurance? At least the dance would end in under 3 hours. Luckily, shopping for car insurance doesn't have to be dreadful, and it can be fast too. Introducing Jerry. Jerry simplifies things by handling the entire insurance shopping process in one place. Just answer a few simple questions, and Jerry quickly compares quotes from over 50 top-rated insurers, and you'll receive personalized options you can trust with 24/7 support. Jerry even cancels your old policy for you, which means switching is easy. Stop needlessly overpaying for car insurance. Drivers who save with Jerry save on average $110 a month. That's more than $1,300 a year. So before you renew your policy, do yourself a favor. Download the Jerry app or head to jerry.ai/Gabfest. In just a few minutes, you can compare quotes and coverages side by side from up to 50 top insurers. Jerry, car insurance made simple and finally on your side. Based on drivers who switched and saved with Jerry over the past 12 months, over 20% of drivers who switched with Jerry found a monthly premium of $87 or less. Not all drivers find savings. What a week of theatrical diplomacy. Trump's summit with Putin ended with President parroting the Russian leader's talking points about Ukrainian territorial concessions required to end the war, and with Trump abandoning the demand for a ceasefire as a next step in the war. Then a summit with the White House and most of Europe. Most of Europe seems to have given up on their vacation, come to the White House for a vacation. They came to wingman the Ukrainian president, and that one ended with Trump kind of endorsing the idea of the U.S. helping to guarantee the safety of a post-war Ukraine. Sort of. John is making visual signals that do not register on the podcast. But the first lesson is the obvious one, which is always you want to be the last person to talk to Trump, right, John?
I mean, yes. Although Vladimir Putin seems to have some staying power after he leaves the room. But generally that is true, David, at least with respect to the immediate remarks that the president says after he has met with you. But I think what appears to be the case as of Thursday of this week is that the two great concessions that were supposedly purchased in Anchorage, and I say purchased because, purchased by giving a person accused of international war crimes a BAFA welcome in the United States, what was supposedly won by that, and the reason that Trump retreated from his claim that there would be serious consequences if Putin didn't agree to a ceasefire, were two things. One was the idea that the U.S. would have a significant role in security guarantees. How do I define significant role? Steve Witkoff, the president's envoy, said there would be like Article 5 level protection of Ukraine. Article 5, an attack on one is an attack on all in terms of NATO, means that is a robust role. And the second was that the Russians and Ukrainians would meet and negotiate. Both of those things, Witkoff said that the Russians had agreed to the Article 5 like role. Neither of those things seems to be true. What seems to be happening is what the Europeans predicted, which was that Putin would play footsie with the idea of some kind of peace in order to keep making gains on the battlefield. And that seems to be what he's doing. The foreign minister Lavrov has said, well, we got to do a lot of this and a lot of that before we have meetings. The clock ticks. The territory is gobbled up, or if nothing else, children die from bombing, which has happened since Alaska. And the idea of a U.S. role, it seems like that's down to maybe some air support. And the reason, and this is my last comment, that this question of what role the U.S. will play is basically Russia has, and Putin in particular, has broken agreement after agreement with respect to Ukraine. So the only way Ukrainians are ever going to agree to a peace deal is if they know that if Russia breaks its promise again, they will have military force to tell Russia to stop. And the U.S. can only provide certain things that Europeans can't. And if that promise of slapping Russia back, if it breaks the promise, it breaks the agreement, if that's weak, then you're not going to get to a peace deal. Anyway, that seems all to have kind of fallen apart after, even though, the president and his team said they had won these concessions from Putin.
Well, do you think, John, that we are closer to a reasonable peace in Ukraine than we were a week ago?
Well, it depends. Some people will say the Russians haven't changed their position. Their terms are, not only do we get to keep what we've taken, but we want more of the Donbas region. So the stuff we haven't taken already, we want more of that. And Ukraine can't be a part of NATO, and we have to be a part of the security talks. Russians are always going to be a part of the security talks in the sense that any peace deal requires the Russians to agree, and they would agree to whatever security promises are part of the peace deal. So in that sense, they do have a kind of final sign-off, which seems sort of weird that the invading country gets to have sign-off, but that's the way a peace deal would work. But the idea that they would be part of the negotiations seems to give them a role that they haven't earned. But to your question about peace, I mean, the fact that everybody's at the table, the fact that there is movement is better than nothing. It's better than just no shelling at all. It's been an intractable problem with a person that is in Vladimir Putin, who is, wily and determined. So I don't know that you could say this is worse than nothing, but I do think that there is a huge gap between what the president and his team claim is happening and what is actually happening. And the reason that matters is when this comes to the next major pass, the world is going to have to look at the peace deal and say, is this fair? And fair by a pretty major tenet of international relations, which is sovereign countries aren't allowed to invade other sovereign countries. I mean, since the Treaty of Westphalia. So is everybody okay with this? And that's, how the narrative is shaped. It goes back to what we were talking about before. How the narrative is shaped kind of matters. And is the U.S. playing a neutral role here, or is essentially shaping a narrative that benefits the Russians in the end and essentially then benefits the idea that bigger, that might makes right?
But Trump is doing that. I mean, he's still talking about this idea that Ukraine somehow is to blame for Russia invading it. Like, that narrative is still his narrative. And so I feel gloomy about all of this because it seemed like, Putin got this meeting in photo op, gave up nothing, and that what the Europeans and Zelensky accomplished by rushing to meet with Trump was fending off utter disaster, in which Trump, basically like hands off Ukraine with thin, if no security guarantees to Putin. And that didn't happen, but that's different from like, we're a step closer to peace.
There's nothing implausible in what you just said. In fact, if you were putting money on things, you'd have to put most of your chips on what you just said. And I would add kind of one other element to that, which is that given what you just said, which is essentially Anchorage won nothing, there is was or is, you guys figure it out, a perfectly plausible argument that said Trump lavished all this praise on Putin as the purchase price to get him to give in on some things. And so you gotta walk with the devil to get to the other side of the bridge. And this is what he needed. And so that's a canny and smart thing to do. There seems to be less evidence that actually did anything. Further, and what creates even more skepticism and support for your position, Emily, is the way in which the president's team has been talking about his negotiating prowess. Steve Witkoff said the president has an uncanny ability to bend people to his sensible way of thinking. He does it each and every time. I've never seen anything quite like it, and I've been around some master deal makers. This is what he's claiming happened in Anchorage. The Secretary of Treasury said Alaska was a show of force by President Trump. It was kind of like inviting your uncontrollable neighbor to your house and showing them your gun case. So those are two things said about what happened in Alaska. Now, you can argue that Alaska was just like 5 yards in a cloud of dust, and it was maybe a tiny little bit of an incremental benefit in terms of getting Putin at the table. But to make these kinds of claims for it is so detached from the reality that we see, experience, and seems to be playing out. It suggests that something else is going on here, and that or that they've totally lost the plot, and Putin does have the upper hand.
This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Found. Do you ever feel like managing your business finances is a full-time job on top of your actual full-time job? You can change that today with Found. Found is a business banking platform that allows you to effortlessly track expenses, manage invoices, and prepare for taxes. One Found user said, Found is going to save me so much headache. It makes everything so much easier. Expenses, income, profits, taxes, invoices even. And Found has 30,000 5-star reviews just like this. So join the other small businesses who are loving Found. Don't put this one off. Join thousands of small business owners who've streamlined their finances with Found. Open a Found account for free at found.com. That's FOUND.com. Found is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services are provided by Piermont Bank, member FDIC. This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Leesa. You know that moment when you sink into a hotel bed and think, why doesn't my bed feel like this? Well, a 5-star sleep every single night at home is what you can expect with Leesa. One of my Slate colleagues mentioned that she upgraded her mattress to a Leesa mattress, and she's raving about it. The ordering process was super easy, just filled out an online form for the mattress she wanted. It arrived at her front door just a few days later. She got the Lisa Legend Hybrid mattress, the combination of memory foam and 2 separate types of coil springs. It's excellent for side sleepers and people who get hot at night. Lisa has a lineup of beautifully crafted mattresses tailored to how you sleep without the luxury price tag. So go to lisa.com for 30% off mattresses, plus get an extra $50 off with promo code GABFEST, exclusive for our GABFest listeners. That's LEESA.com, promo code GABFEST for 30% off mattresses plus an extra $50 off. Be sure to enter our show name after checkout so they know we sent you. Lisa.com, promo code GABFEST.
We are joined today by Jerusalem Dempsis, who until recently was a writer and podcaster for The Atlantic, but has just gone off to start a really interesting, to me, new venture, a publication called The Argument that is liberal and kind of trying to stand for liberalism right now. And I wanted to read a little bit of the kind of introductory essay. To move out of this post-liberal populist moment towards a better future, one with equal rights, material prosperity, and commitment to human progress will require our government, culture, politics, and people to recommit ourselves to liberal values. Persuading people is not the work of 5,000-word treatises or about how bad the post-liberal world order really is. We get it and no one cares. See the 2024 election. It's going to happen if people are convinced the lives they want, prosperous, safe, and free to live how they want, are best protected under liberalism. So, Jerusalem, why is starting this new publication the best way to help these values get out into the world? And let's make this a little more concrete and a little less abstract. What space are you filling? What kinds of subjects are you going to tackle? How do you see your place in our fragmented information landscape?
Yeah, well, I won't be so bold as to say this is the best way to defend liberalism. I think it's the best way for me, given my position and the talents and access and privileges that I have to do what I can to make liberalism in the 21st century a better version of itself. And so, I mean, to me, the argument was really born out of 2 problems. The first is that I think that an ideologically focused pro-liberal magazine that has a combative frame is honestly not something that exists right now. The liberal media, when we think of things like the New York Times or the Atlantic or the New Yorker, these are very big institutions. They serve millions of readers and often are need to serve people who have very diverse ideological perspective. And their mission is often to actually make sure that they're representing a bunch of opinions across the spectrum. And that's great. Those institutions should exist. I'm glad they're doing what they're doing. The investigative journalism that they do, the long form essays they do, that's fantastic. But when I look at the media landscape and see which magazines or media outlets are able to really inject their policy priorities, their framework for how to live the world directly into the political mainframe, it's often these smaller outfits that are willing to be just really rabid attack dogs for the things they believe in. It's things I think on the right, when you think of things like the American Compass with tariffs, I mean, the tariff policy we're seeing right now is literally the brainchild of a very small media outlet, really led by Orrin Cass and the American Compass folks. He's literally interviewing J.D. Vance on stage, and you can see the influence that has really had on real policy outcomes. And you see this throughout history, right? The New Republic, the National Review, this is something that is a really deep core part of how democratic politics works, is that you get a band of people who have pretty strong views about the way that the world should be moving, and you get them to make controversial and attention-grabbing arguments in order to do that. So to me, that's big problem 1 that we're trying to solve, is that I don't see that in that space. But the second problem they're trying to solve is just that, we have a subtweet problem, I think, in liberal media. People will be very snide and rude to each other, but often will not directly engage with the arguments anyone else is making. And so a big kind of thing that we're doing is that if we're trying to win the attention war, we can't really do it the way that the post-liberal or the anti-liberal media does it, right? When the New York Post goes, hey, look at this migrant in the, New York City subway, like that evokes like a feeling of disgust, fear, xenophobia. Like there's no like liberal equivalent of that to get you to click. Like I click those articles because that's what it does. It like hacks your brain, it hacks your attention, and then it has like a political valence to it. And there's not like a liberal version of this, but one way that we can actually get attention is through making controversial arguments. And so you've seen from our launch this week, just like how much, discourse has really been spurred by some of the arguments that we've been making. And to later today, I mean, we're recording on Thursday, August 21st, we have a very, very fun argument coming out where Matt Brunig and Kelsey Piper are going to basically go at each other over UBI. So, I mean, that's the kind of thing that's my theory of the case for how we're going to make change in our neck of the woods.
UBI being universal basic income.
This is going to sound like an ignorant question because it kind of is, but what is liberalism? What are the ideas of liberalism in 2025? What is it? I really don't even know.
No, I mean, this is not an ignorant question. And it was so funny. I mean, like I wrote maybe like 50,000 definitions of varying lengths in the course of coming up with this project. Because to be clear, even within people who consider themselves like liberal philosophers or whatever, like surprise, those people have not agreed on what liberalism is. I think to me, and my introductory essay to the argument is really what liberalism means to me. And liberalism to me is a philosophy that was created to answer the question of how people can live with each other. Like, how do we live with each other when we are all so different? When you're divided by race, class, gender, when you're divided by religious affiliation, when you're divided by what you think a good life is. Like, if I think a good life is like having 1,000,000 one-night stands over the course of my life, and someone else in my community thinks a good life is not having sex except for the person you're married with. These are two vastly different worldviews, and liberalism seeks to answer how do we create a society that allows both of these people to exist to the fullest extent of what they want without impeding on each other's rights as much as possible. And this is like a difficult problem. There's not like one answer. Like liberals have not been like, oh, we've like figured it out. There's like one system and it completely resolves everything. But there are some basic values and intuitions we have, right? One is respect for individual rights. That if someone has a personal preference for how they want to live their life, in general, we're going to go like, all right, no one's really going to bother you as long as it's not infringing on the rights of others. Another thing about liberalism, though, that I think is really important is that it's not just like libertarian. It's not just like, oh, everyone's free to do whatever they want as long as they're not bothering anyone else. It's also, I mean, and this is something I take a lot from Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum, it's also meant to provide people, you have to have the actual capacity to live the life you want, right? Like if my version of a good life is that I am writing articles online for public consumption, but I have no access to an education, no access to the internet, no access to freedom because, maybe I'm a woman in a society that doesn't allow me to speak in public, then what are those rights really? Like, yeah, theoretically, I could go on and like do whatever I wanted, but the government also has the obligation to enable us, to give us the capacity to actually enact that. So to me, liberalism is like, is trying to answer this big question of, yes, human beings will always be different from each other. Even in ethnically homogenous societies, in religiously homogenous societies, they will find ways to differ from one another. And if we allow them, they will kill each other over it. And so how do we create political systems, cultural systems, private systems that allow people to thrive without devolving into the kind of chaos and anarchy and cycles of recrimination that you normally see in human society and what I'm very worried about us falling into right now?
Picking up on the Orrin Cass American Compass analogy, it appears that Orrin Cass, despite his good work as Mitt Romney's policy director, elevated really on the strength of the tariff argument, which had this singular political figure, Donald Trump, upending all of world economics based on it. Do you see a similar vanguard idea that helps you make your way in the crowded landscape, or is that not right? Is it not a single, Orrin has other ideas, but basically tariffs is the thing and Donald Trump is the thing.
So I think that's a great question. I think there's a couple things. One is that like the thing that ends up elevating ideas is that there's a politician who makes that their own, right? Like without Donald Trump, like who really cares what's going on at American Compass? Like Donald Trump is what made that something that we all pay attention to. And then we trace the ideological valence there. So like, I have no idea what the political system is going to look like in 4 years. I have no idea whether liberalism will find a home in the Democratic Party or whether it'll find a home in the Republican Party. For instance, like in other countries, liberalism is held sometimes in the center right parties. You know what I mean? So like there's a level to which like I am not the politician, so I don't know where that's going to go. But personally, I think when we are thinking about the stuff we're covering, I really took a lot of time to think about what I thought the most important questions from a domestic policy standpoint were. And the top three areas we're covering are the politics and economics of growth, which has to do a lot with the abundance arguments that have been made by, Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson in their book, but also in the writings, that I've done at The Atlantic and Vox, and Matt Iglesias has done, that Eric Levitz has done, Rachel Cohen has done, in all these different places. Abundance and the politics and economics of growth, I think, are central because to me, that is the main way that human flourishing happens, that we have economic growth and we can distribute that to as many people as possible to make people's lives better. But the politics of it are really hard. I mean, we're seeing that with immigration for sure. We're seeing that with AI. We're seeing that with tariff policy and tax policy and fiscal policy. Like, it is not easy to say, like, how do we grow as a country? The second area that we're really going to cover is on technology and society. And here is a place where I think there is actually significant coverage, of course, across the political spectrum. Like, you can't, throw a stone without hearing an article about how AI is destroying schools or like, the workplace or whatever it is. But I think there's like not as much thinking through and arguing for like just specific concrete things we should be doing to improve people's lives, because technology should be like a positive sum thing, right? Like, it is very possible that we could create a situation where AI takes away annoying things that we have to do, like planning trips or like making grocery lists or whatever, without like immiserating everyone and like, creating massive problems. But to have that happen will require government intervention and intervention by individual people demanding what they want. So like, what are those things? I mean, one piece that I've been thinking about writing for a long time is like, I think if you polled this, it would be like a 95-5 issue. If like a chatbot has a sexual interaction with a minor, immediate, massive fine on whatever company's allowed that to happen. I just think that like this is one of those things where we need to figure out the specifics. Like, are you going to the ISPs, like whatever? But like, why is no one advocating for these basic arguments around regulating these companies and actually making sure that as this technology develops, we are doing it in a way that is pro-social, pro-human, and towards human flourishing. And then the third area is really gender and family. I think like, imagining what an egalitarianism of the 21st century looks like. I mean, this has to do with gender, this has to do with race, but in general, I think that like we're seeing that the gender cleavage is becoming more and more politically relevant in a way that it wasn't for a long time. I mean, usually you saw very big differences between people who had conservative gender views on gender and liberal views on gender, but there were women with conservative views on gender and there were men with liberal views on gender. And now as we're looking at younger populations, you're seeing increasingly that men and women, as a function of their own gender identity and sexual and sex, are like making political decisions as a result of that. And that to me is like a really scary thing if anyone who's a liberal, because, we don't want to create a society where people increasingly are just doing politics based on immutable characteristics. Like, that does not go in good places. So those are the big three areas. Of course, we'll cover other stuff as well, but that's to me like the three big questions we have to answer.
So, Jerusalem, there's obviously, as you know, probably better than me right now, a history of small, large political kind of thought leader publications, and there have been lots of them on the left, and they've started at various moments. Slate, Vox, The New Republic, The American Prospect. I got that out of order historically and chronologically. I wonder, I look at your roster of writers, and what it seems like to me is that you are standing in a space that some of those publications have kind of moved away from. That is more about moderation. It's more about like trying to show the Democratic Party that there is a way to stand for more popular centrist ideas. And, some of the writers who you're bringing in, like, this is very much part of their agenda. And I wonder if I'm right, if that's how you see the space that you're occupying. We've been talking in a more like a kind of mix of the concrete and the abstract. But when you think of this as a political project, is that a space that you think is kind of opened somewhat in this landscape? And are you gathering together a bunch of writers who are on Substack making these arguments, but by packaging them, showing that there is this like overall home for these ideas that, in this moment where the Democratic Party is wrestling with this question of this tension between its base, which often wants things that are more progressive than the things you've been talking about, and then this like part of the American electorate that is more moderate and wants more centrist ideas out there?
So it is true. There are people who we've recruited, included Laksha Jain of Split Ticket, who's going to be doing original polling for us, which is going to be super exciting. And of course, one of our columnists is Matt Iglesias, who has made this a core argument in his work around the need for the Democratic Party to moderate. My view is that liberalism transcend. I mean, I think that there's like a traditional way that people think about politics, which is like, is Democrat versus Republican? Like these are the two this is the axis that is relevant, like left versus right. Liberalism can exist in socialists, like one of our columnists, Matt Brunig, who's a socialist. Liberalism can exist on the center right, and Adam Ozimek is one of our contributors. Liberalism, like you can be a liberal and a lot of things. You can be a liberal Christian, you can be a liberal, So to me, like the thing that's important is wherever you are on the spectrum, are you on the pro-growth, positive sum side of that spectrum? So do you believe in things like it is possible for more people to come into this country and provide better economic opportunities for everyone? Or do you think that someone coming here is necessarily taking away from someone else? There are people on the left and right who view like immigrants as necessarily coming into conflict with the American worker and the American family. And so like, to me, like, yes, like there are people inside the coalition that I'm seeking to build of writers who their project is like for the moderation of the Democratic Party to occur. And there are people in the coalition who like do not have that project. And so I think that like this is one of those things where because we are a magazine and not an arm of the Democratic or Republican parties, like I don't need to like do the politics of it. You know what I mean? Like someone else, whoever runs for office, if there's like a future Barack Obama who's running for office, like they will much more decide what that coalition looks like than I do. But in terms of like what we're trying to stand for, what we're trying to do, I want to have the fights out early. I don't want to wait until it's 2028 and then all of a sudden like all these fights are happening in public. Like I want to have the fights now over universal health care, over all of the different important issues like facing the country. And I think that one of those issues certainly is how do you represent a country that is often well to the right on some issues of people who are doing commentating? Like when you just talk to people, I mean, if you ever do reporting in like much of America, even basic things like how people talk, like the use of various shibboleths in like elite language, like it sounds foreign to people in most of this country, even if they would have very progressive views on healthcare or then very regressive views on trans rights. I mean, like this is a thing where people try to make it super, super black and white here. But I think in general, I believe in majoritarianism. I believe in democracy. And that means you have to really respect the fact that a lot of this country is more moderate than us on a variety of issues.
Jerusalem Demsis is the editor of the new publication, The Argument. We look forward to reading and listening and seeing what you guys come up with. Jerusalem, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's go to cocktail chatter. When you, Emily Bazelon, are having an argument, say, with somebody in your life, but then having a drink and then chatting about it, what are you going to be chattering about?
So I am sorry to be on the dark side today.
Oh my God, here we go.
I just am really, so it's school, college, university, and K through 12 are all about to gear up. And because I live in a university town, this is always this time of year in which like the students come back and it's the bittersweet end of summer and we think a lot about them. And there are 6,000 aspiring students around the world who will not be coming to the United States this year, even though, or at least it looks like that, even though they have visas, they have admissions to universities because they can't get appointments or for some other mysterious reason, the visa process is just blocking them. And this is happening in Iran and Afghanistan and China and other countries. And it is so sad to me that for these kind of arbitrary reasons, our government is dashing the dreams of these young people. And then, of course, it's also like a huge loss to the United States. It's just a giant talent drain, kind of refusal to embrace all of the talent that could come here and either stay here after graduation or go home and bring all the education they've gotten back to their home countries. And, it just, there's so many just like kind of brutal, thoughtless things happening right now as the result of our government. But this is one that really is heartbreaking to me.
It's not even thoughtless. It's not even thoughtless though, Emily. That's the problem with it. It's like deliberate, intentional. Yeah. They want this. They want to keep people away. They don't want these students to be here. I keep thinking about these 2 Chinese students I met a few years ago who were studying material science. They were studying batteries at American universities, and all they wanted to do was stay in the U.S. and work for U.S. companies. And I am 1,000,000% certain that they're now working for, Huawei or BYD or something, making batteries that are outstripping American batteries left and right. And what's the fucking point of that? John, what's your chatter?
Sorry, I hesitate to not add something that's incredibly depressing and woeful. But I'm not going to, because we can't. We must.
You can't tease that shit, man. You just got to go for it.
No. I mean, I'm chattering about as a somewhat frequent air traveler and one who just spent a lot of time on planes. There's something about the red eye from Alaska that really feels like it's twice as long as it is. But there is a lawsuit from some passengers suing Delta Airlines for selling them window seats and charging them more for window seats. Anybody who's clicked on the little window, trying to squeeze a little more comfort out of the coach area, has paid the extra, $42 or whatever to get next to the window seat. And then you sit in the seat and you have not only no window, but you have like the negative window experience, which is that there's this wall there and there's nothing. So you feel encased in a way that even in a middle seat, you might not, because in a middle seat, at least you could look out the window. This is, of course, an abomination. And now at least a couple of people are suing Delta for charging you more for a thing that doesn't exist.
Perfect class action lawsuit.
Yes.
Go plaintiff's bar.
So we'll be keeping a close eye on that, and we will inform you at the when it all works out. I also wonder whether the people who are angry about being in seats that don't recline will get in on that. Whether when you purchase a ticket, it is implicit that the seat will recline, and if it doesn't, have they overcharged you?
I recall on this very show that you guys were anti-recliners, the polite, dignified people who do not recline. And I was like the bad girl who thinks it's fine to recline one seat. So I'll be in on that one.
It's obviously incredibly rude to recline in any fashion, but it's also bootless. It's a total futile... Because futile, not futile, although I suppose it could be futile.
Maybe both.
It's futile because you're not sleeping. You're not sleeping, and you're not getting any more comfortable. You're not.
I don't know if that's true.
Don't give in to big recline.
Well, it's also you're just taking you're causing a cascade of events.
Yes,
and you're causing suffering for others for no. We don't need to relitigate this. We've already litigated it.
Causing more suffering than you are alleviating with yourself.
Do you guys think, as a matter of sort of economics, public policy, life, that it is right and proper that airlines have now figured out a way to come up with ways to discriminatorily charge for every little bit? So that it's fine now that you have to pay an extra $35 for a bag, or that you have to pay $42 for a window seat? Or is that level of work that you have to do to figure out what you're getting a problem? Or is it good that you can now find the right level for yourself?
Oh, that's interesting. I don't know. I think having different price categories for olives with a pimento and olives without is, slicing things a little thin. But I don't know what the answer to that question.
Can I offer my $12 solution? It's not a solution, but it's helping me. And this comes from my sister-in-law, the foot hammock. Have you guys tried the foot hammock? It's this little thing that you order on like Amazon or whatever, and it hangs over the tray, but the tray is still attached. And I don't think it bothers the person in front of you. And then it creates this little hammock for your feet. And I always have trouble with my feet. So it's like helping things. And it really does cost like $12.
Interesting.
And you can use it on multiple flights.
Oh my
that
God.
did not answer my question.
Oh my
but
God.
I know. I avoided
That's
the
a mulch,
question.
and that's good
I'm
for
not
your
sure
garden.
what I think about. I think that it's probably fine. Like, yeah, you can set different prices for different services, and that it does make a big difference. If you buy more legroom, you notice.
Whoever got that joke that I made, please let me know.
I wasn't listening. I'm just trying to get to my chatter. My chatter is...
You weren't listening. You're not supposed to admit that.
My chatter is... I just got back from vacation, and I think I've probably done this chatter before because I remember having the same reaction last time I went to Traverse City, Michigan. So my kids and I went to Traverse City, Michigan, and we actually stayed at a lake 30 minutes outside of Traverse City. That is the most serene and wonderful place in America. Lake Michigan is a miracle. Lake Michigan is a miracle. The Michigan side of Lake Michigan has these softest sand beaches, these sand beaches that have the sand that is the softness of the Greek islands. The water is a shocking electric blue color. These dunes plunge 400 feet straight down into the lake, and you can sort of surf your way down these wonderful dunes. There's a vast sky, and because it's a lake, there's none of that sticky, stinky feeling that you get when you are on an ocean beach. There's also no weird creatures. There's nothing that will sting you. There's no kind of kelp. Is it kelp or is it alive? Is it kelp or is it a monster feeling that you get? There's no terrifying surf. It's just a marvel of the world. Lake Michigan is a marvel. And they call it the fresh coast. I'm like, yes, it is the fresh coast. It is so good. I hate water, but I will ride or die for Lake Michigan, man. Exactly the opposite of Lake Michigan. Just a quick other thing is, if you want an amazing read, there's a New York Magazine story, The Cryptomaniacs and the Torture Townhouse, how two men charged with an outrageous kidnapping scheme introduced a new kind of crime to the city, by Ezra Marcus and Jen Wisner. It is an incredible story about some of the worst people you'll ever read about who were doing a crypto extortion, crypto torture scheme. It's incredible. And they are John's neighbors, but they're kind of down the street from you, John.
No, it's true. Like,
awesome.
I wonder if people are worse than they ever were, because those
people were not good. They were not good.
And I just wonder, I mean, obviously you think in the Middle Ages, you had some, I mean, you just saw throughout history, there have been the absolutely depraved and inhumane, but man, I don't know. There's some inducements to it. There's got to be something different about the level of awfulness of the truly awful now.
Listeners, you had great chatters this week. Please keep them coming. Please email us at gabfest@slate.com about your chatter. And this one was so good, we actually rushed this through the queue. Because we were like, this is a great one. Alban Ring in Stockholm has a chatter. I actually, when Alban sent this in, I was like, I got to watch this. So I watched it. It was very cool.
Hello, Gabfest. Alban Ring from Stockholm, Sweden here. My chatter is about the 113-year-old church in the city of Kiruna, located in the far north of Sweden, that has to be moved in order to expand the mine under the city. The church is 35 meters high, 40 meters wide, and weighs 672 tons. The massive building will be moved in one piece on a special trailer a distance of 5 kilometers to the new city center. The whole thing will be live streamed for 2 days on Swedish television. The program is the latest example of the Swedish phenomenon slow TV, where the program Den stora älgvandringen, the Great Elk Migration, probably is the most famous one. In this day and age, where we are constantly bombarded with tweets, TikToks and clickbaits, it is incredibly soothing just to lean back and in real time watch the 1,000-year-old annual migration of elks or a massive church slowly move through a city. No commercial ads, no political propaganda or dividing messages. Just life, slowly happening in its own pace. Love you guys and the show.
That's all for our episode this week. We also have a bonus episode in your feed. We're going to talk about Pam Bondi, Ed Martin, and the weaponization of the Trump Justice Department. That's just for Slate Plus members who also get special discounts on live shows. We're just planning live shows, so we got live shows coming for you. You never hit the paywall on the Slate site, much more as a Slate Plus member. So if you are a member, thank you. Enjoy it. If you're not a member, subscribe to Slate Plus directly from the Political Gabfest show page on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or visit slate.com/Gabfest Plus to get access wherever you listen. And also, if you want another Slate podcast to listen to, if you're hungry for more Slate podcasts, check out Slate Money this week. Digital cash, IRL wrenches, and Felix and Elizabeth and Emily talk about something which I'm really interested in, which I kind of want to talk about, which is the Trump continuing to involve himself in the operations of large U.S. companies. This new effort, maybe the U.S. is going to just take 10% of Intel. And they also talk about wrench attacks, which is the kind of related to this crypto thing I was just talking about a minute ago, which are wealthy crypto holders are being targeted with real life violence. So check it out. That's our show for today. The Gabfest is produced by Shana Roth. Our researcher is Emily Ditto. Our theme music is by They Might Be Giants. Ben Richmond is Senior Director for Podcast Operations. For Emily Bazelon and John Dickerson, I'm David Plotz. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.
For those who want more out of every moment this summer, Mazda has more 2025 IIHS Top Safety Pick Plus awards than any other brand as of May 2025. What more could you ask for? Discover how Mazda has more to move you today. Visit iihs.org to learn more.
Every Mazda SUV offers you an elevated driving experience and refined performance. Discover it at Mazda of New Rochelle.